Welcome to the CoinGecko podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Young. Each week, we will be interviewing someone from the blockchain industry to learn more about this fast-moving cryptocurrency economy. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for coming. The CoinGecko podcast is produced each week to help you stay ahead of the curve. Show notes can be found at podcast.coingecko.com. I highly encourage you to join our newsletter where we send out top news in the crypto industry every Monday to Friday. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter and Telegram at CoinGecko. Welcome to the CoinGecko podcast. For today's episode, we'll be welcoming Stephen McKee, founding partner and CEO of Amentum Investment Management. Stephen has been involved with Handshake, HNS. Handshake is a decentralized naming solution for the internet and provides a blockchain-powered alternative for allocating ownership rights to top-level domains. A little bit more about Stephen before we start. Stephen has been involved in crypto for the past 7 years. He was previously the head of growth and product content at Purse and also hosts the Blockchainer podcast. Welcome to the CoinGecko podcast, Stephen.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So for the first question, can you explain to us in your simplest manner what is Handshake and why is it important to decentralize the domain name system?
Of course. So, the current web as it stands right now with traditional DNS is centralized to, a small group of parties based out of an organization here in the US called ICANN. And so essentially what they serve as are the technical stewards, custodians of the web, which basically run and dictate what sort of new GTLDs or like top level domain names will exist on the internet. So they essentially like play the gatekeepers over individuals and other registrars that want to sell access to these names through a very like convoluted and expensive process that you have to go through, specifically through them. So, as with all other cryptocurrencies and kind of the concept of Byzantine fault tolerance and, building a blockchain as a whole, the idea is to remove these central authorities. So in Handshake's case, they're looking to kind of solve what is called like previously as like Zuko's trilemma, which says that, if you're going to build a decentralized namespace, you have to satisfy kind of like 2 or 3 of these properties, which one being human readable names, like it needs to be secure, right? So Byzantine fault tolerant, etc. And it needs to be like a distributed namespace. So if, you wanted to build a blockchain using all these different things that we've learned over the past 10 years since Bitcoin, since Ethereum, to come together to build a new chain that could remove the need for these centralized custodians that would be the gatekeepers of the current web and build a alternative root anchor to ICANN, which is essentially a soft fork of the current DNS system, wherein the system is backwards compatible and does resolve out to ICANN if a name doesn't exist in the Handshake's namespace. And so the idea is, it's kind of a technical Trojan horse of sorts that you can take the current web and the current namespace, and then we can expand that to an unlimited array of names as long as they support UTF-8. And so we can have as long as it's less than 63 characters as well, which is similar to the current DNS rule, you can have any sort of name that you want. And so the idea is it's an advancement over the current DNS namespace that's backwards compatible. And then, also it allows us to remove that centralized authority. So the idea is taking some of the best new creations that have come about, like segregated witness, light clients, Urkel trees, which were designed by JJ, one of the main developers, Christopher Jeffrey of Bcoin, and then now Handshake HSD. It's, what we all like to joke about and say like an artisanal approach at what you would do if you wanted to create a blockchain that was not only like application specific, but was secure and focused on doing one particular thing. Whereas Bitcoin was successful because it was good at what it did, peer-to-peer payments, and it's great at that. Ethereum wanted to be more generalizable, right? Smart contract, extendability, back composability, that's nice. But then, Ethereum itself, because it's constantly looking for use cases to, sustain its value and to grow its ecosystem. And Handshake out of the gate, similar to Bitcoin, is coming out saying, hey, we have this grander extendability here being so natively architected to work with the modern web. But we also don't change some important aspects, like UTXOs. We don't have an extracted model like Ethereum does. And so, we're just focused on doing one thing, doing it really well, and making it scalable enough to handle that use case and to be able to just out of the gate have something for people to actually use that can be integrated in multiple different aspects and with different security trade-offs. So that's like the shortest pitch that I can give when someone goes, why does Handshake have its own blockchain? The idea is that in order to fully realize the idea of having something kind of generalizable but still application specific, you kind of really got to start at kind of just first principles and work your way backwards and think about what has the industry got right, in the past 10, 11 years since Bitcoin's inception, and what do we need to focus on to build something that people are going to actually want to use.
Who came up with the idea of Handshake? When did he or she come up with the idea and white paper for Handshake?
Yeah, so the exact time that the original idea came about, if I had to guess, probably when towards the end of the time that I was at Purse in late 2017. So maybe sometime in that summer, if I would imagine maybe JJ and the other individuals at Purse and the other partners and creators that have been listed elsewhere, kind of came together. And at the time, JJ was working on Bcoin, which was the first full node alternative implementation Bitcoin, rebuilt in Node.js that JJ and another gentleman, Fedor and Dutney, had originally worked on. And from there, I guess the idea was what we couldn't build in Bitcoin, JJ saw this opportunity to kind of take all of his experience of working, in the web space. Previously, at one point, he had worked at GoDaddy, and also re-implementing Bitcoin in all of its entirety, over in Node for this modular extendable library for Bcoin. And so, since that served as the kind of mature boilerplate for Handshake, HNS, and HSD, the code base came from a very mature project, and then from there was able to be extended out further. And so I think a lot of the early design around how the system would be architected came from a lot of probably JJ, since he's the main implementer of the project. But then also Joseph Poon and others played a role in likely the game theory and the architecture and how that all should best be set up. So at least from like kind of the core constituents there, and also Andrew Lee from Purse, and then Andrew Lee from, I think it's London Trust Media, and Private Internet Access VPN. There's two Andrew Lees on the project, so sometimes that can be confusing. And so as far as like the original kind of like core, I guess, creators, that's who I would personally like recognize as who those people are. And also Boima Fambula, who coincidentally my fund Amentum, which I'm CEO of, he was also an original co-creator of our fund and company Amentum prior to going to work and to build Handshake full time. And then to which later, we invested as a fund into Handshake as well, and also a slew of other projects. And so, really it just came from a core group of folks that really supported Bcoin, really supported JJ, and saw an opportunity to kind of really build something important and starting from square one.
How is Handshake structured? Is there a foundation? And then I remember there was some sort of early investors from some private sales. Do you know how much it raised? And then how's the development team going around?
So all that stuff is transparent. It's on the website. You can find it in quite a few other articles and places as well. And there's proof of all this stuff in the code base as well. But the entirety of the, I guess, kind of like the initial Genesis allotment of Handshake was in total 1.36 billion. And what that included was broken down into various different segments and went to different groups. So it was broken down mostly into 7.5% segments, which comes out to roughly like 102 million HNS allotments. So you can say 102 million or so went to the initial kind of creator group of individuals and their businesses and firms and developers that worked initially on Handshake. And then You had the investors, which are folks like us. So, they originally raised $10.2 million of assets, not for the fund, for the development of the protocol or for anything like that, but that was to go to the false organizations, and that ultimately that we hope would be, future custodians of Handshake and would look to adopt it and to recognize it, upon its launch. I would imagine game theoretically was how that would work out. So that $10.2 million that was raised was given away to those organizations, which are also listed on the Handshake website. There's like a sponsors and grants page on there that breaks down all those different organizations. So like Debian and FreeBSD and other groups that are like listed up on there were able to kind of just get a jump start on Handshake. And so with that, I believe some of that came with an additional allotment of Handshake too. So I think they both got USD and HNS, committing their keys to the tree. And then the other percentages, so there was like a certain amount and segment for all of the airdrop participants. So there was a Goose Eggs airdrop, which is like a zero knowledge claim scheme for individuals to use their current keys that they've had submitted, their PGP keys and things of that nature from GitHub, on Keybase, and a few other places and sources that these keys were farmed from, and they were included in the tree based on some other parameters. For instance, GitHub, I think it was having 15 followers or more sometime after like mid-February in 2019. And there was a certain date where all those keys were pulled as well. And essentially over 200,000 unique individuals are included in this majority allotment. And of those individuals, they each got somewhere around like 4,200 HNS. And then prior to that, there was an online faucet where individuals could confirm and verify their GitHub keys, their Freenode addresses, and their PGP keys to also get allotments. And that was a smaller pool of individuals. I think that was somewhere around like 2,000 folks. So the majority of Handshake is owned by, those over like 200,000 future airdrop recipients and folks who can claim. And then there are, some other allotments. I believe I can't remember the other like recipient groups off the top of my head here, but there is a nice pie chart somewhere on that site, or probably you can find it in Internet Archives on one of the previous versions of the site, but all that's open source on the HSD GitHub too. The breakdown is, 1.36 billion or so out of a future 2.04 billion, I believe, is the total off the top of my head here. And so, the rest of the assets are mined via proof of work, which is a Blake 2B SHA-3 proof of work algorithm. So generally, that's the overall breakdown of kind of how the initial airdrop happens. So if you have GitHub keys, if you had your keys were included in the tree, you can submit your claims. But then also, if you're the Alexa top 100,000, so that was farmed as well from those lists. So the top 100,000 Alexa names each got a different allotment of HNS. Some of the earlier names, I think like the first maybe 2,000, maybe it was 10,000, something like that. They got different allotments, and you can actually see all that information live. It's all part of the tree. It's all part. These are all like in consensus as far as like consensus rules. So all this stuff is set in stone and is there forever, and it can't get changed. But if you go to dns.live, there's a website there that shows all the current names that have been claimed. So it just hits an HSD node and then, gets back the name information of who's claimed their name from the tree thus far and who's gotten their, allotment of Handshake that is included with that. And so there's a variable amount there, and that makes up one of the other 7.5% allotments as well. So, a good group with the Alexa top 100,000 got somewhere between like 102 million, like HNS divided amongst them as well.
Yeah, I remember in the early days of crypto, Namecoin was one of the most popular projects because it aims to decentralize the DNS system too. They have this .bit top level domain that is decentralized. However, Namecoin didn't really become popular. How is Handshake different, and how will we not repeat the mistakes of Namecoin?
Yeah, there's a really nice interview that MIT Technology Review did on the Handshake project, myself, Tai Shun from Namebase, and a few other folks that goes over this general idea. But the general idea here is like back then, Namecoin created itself. There was a very small, limited amount of crypto adopters at the time. Namecoin had to compete against Bitcoin, which was also growing like simultaneously. But just technology-wise, just the right way to architect something like Namecoin just wasn't quite there yet. And also, you had to also take into account not trying to just start from square one, and you wanted to just not trying to create a complete alternative system that was completely separate from current DNS. That was a very early mistake. Again, like Handshake's DNS is essentially a soft fork of the current DNS in the sense that we've extended the namespace, but then also it will resolve recursively back out to ICANN's root servers if and when, in which case a name doesn't exist in Handshake's tree. So, in no way are we completely separating ourselves from this web. We're more of like a drop-in alternative. And so, that is one consideration. To the aspects around like flat file storage, Urkel trees, how those names are going to be stored and served, updated, covenants, which is what part of the Handshake architecture on how the Vickrey bid auction system works. That's something that came later, a few years out from Bitcoin's inception and Namecoin's inception. That works very well for a secure UTXO set, and also light clients. So like the SPV light resolver client HNSD, which is not to be confused with HSD, the actual full client daemon. It itself will, just interact with headers and to verify that, names and where they can be resolved from a full node. And so basically it's like different security trade-offs of, do I want to run my own full node, and which is in a recursive resolver and authoritative name server over the Handshake namespace. But then also, you have a light client that can work alongside the system that someone can run, passively and say like a Windows tray or a background in there. Or I can just change my local resolve.conf files on my computer, say on my Mac, to someone else's full node, and just, trust that I'm sending my queries to their system. Or I could reference another zone resolver, something like NextDNS, which has added support for Handshake, where they run an instance of HSD where they're resolving and storing Handshake names, and then so you can make a request directly through NextDNS using the traditional web DNS, so you don't even need to make any actual changes aside from add support for their servers on your local device for your network. And so there's many different ways that Handshake can be incorporated into the modern web. That Namecoin, which mostly is working, have to have a full node client in order to like validate names and etc. And they'll continue to improve that system, and the developers work very, very hard. It's just different considerations for Handshake to kind of be a root anchor and a canonical reference, with rich data availability, but is also agnostic to how it can be utilized best. And I think there's a right and wrong way to approach things, and not that Namecoin took it and it did it wrong. It's just they did what was available at the time. And 10 years, 11 years really makes a big difference in how these systems can be implemented.
All right, cool. So I'm just wondering, how does Handshake compare against the .crypto top-level domain offered by Unstoppable Domains, and also the .eth offered by Ethereum Name Service? Don't you think that Handshake is just a feature within an existing blockchain instead of it being an entire project of its own?
Of course. So So I've got some interesting stories from both of those. So on the regard of like Unstoppable Domains, from my understanding, they were built originally on an underlying blockchain called Zaliqua, and then I think they created these things called ZRC20 contracts, like basically EVM compatible smart contracts, that then they ran like an instance of that on Ethereum. And I think that's where they maintain the .crypto domain, which I believe, if that is the case, it's also just potentially a multi-sig that controls that name. And so with that, they have this name registered .crypto, and then they sell people access to this one TLD that they've created, .crypto, wherein, Handshake anything can be a TLD. You can own Bobby / I can own Mackie, you can own CoinGecko. That can be its own TLD, right? And then you can have any other additional domain, subdomain affixed on top of that. So, for instance, you could have news.coingecko or etc. And so the idea is Unstoppable Domains, they're limited, so they are releasing like other names, right? And they have other that they support. But the idea is you want to give the user complete control over what that name is or should be. And because again, you're just trading one set of gatekeepers, ICANN, for another, this unstoppable domains group, which is like, slowly iterating and like changing and has a completely different security model than a proof of work Byzantine fault tolerant system, right? That has its own proof of work security and its own unique hashing algorithm that has a dedicated economy of scale behind it, kind of protecting your namespace. And then, so the same goes to like ENS. So ENS, great folks. What they're working on is they're just kind of tackling the concept of naming in just two different perspectives. I've spoken to a gentleman there named Brantley, who is basically the COO there, I believe, at ENS Domain. He's a fan of Handshake. He likes what we're doing. He understands our approach is hard. We probably have a very difficult approach from his, we'll have a difficult time ahead of us, in his perspective on like, just because we are basically kind of Trojan horsing ourselves in as this extension versus what they're doing, where they're literally trying to go and working hand in hand with ICANN. They were also at ICANN meeting that they had in Montreal this year. They had HNS, ENS, and a few other folks there back in, I think, October or November timeframe. And we all presented there. We, as in other folks in the Handshake community, so that was the Purse, Bcoin team, and then Namebase as well. Some folks from there attended. His idea is, we are working directly with them, that slowly add support for these different names into our registry over time. We're focused, once particularly, on ETH, right? But then, also, they want to be able to work cross-compatible with current DNS, and they have support for DNSSEC as well. So essentially, they're kind of just approaching things, one from .eth perspective, and then also whatever else they want to work with, like going forward through, the normal bureaucratic process, wherein we're like, hey, we're Handshake, we're here, here's this alternative root zone. You want to buy a name on Handshake? Great, it can be whatever it is. And then now the name is secured by blockchain itself. And now there is no central authority which will dictate what's going forward with this. Versus also ENS, again, its own architecture, doing a different thing, but it is maintained by a 7-person multisig, which can be found on their ENS domain group as well. Folks like Nick there, Vlad Zamfir, I believe Taylor from My Crypto, Taylor Monahan is another folks. And so the idea too is that like you have this multi-sig group that basically controls the ENS domain like registry. So it feels like they just, again, each of these different groups have different focuses where we feel like Handshake is the generalizable, extendable, agnostic naming blockchain where you want to come have a decentralized name and identity, cool. Whatever this moniker means to you, whether it's your Twitter handle, your Instagram name, your online brand identity, the name of your YouTube channel, whatever, you own that. And that name can now be used as an identifier across the web in many different ways. And you can have subdomains, which can be utilized in any form of business or personal use that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, ICANN has been aggressively adding many top-level domains recently. So like now, for example, one can buy .accountant, .auction, .camera, .car, .doctor, etc. This wasn't the case several years ago. And for Handshake's case, like if you own doctor.com, you basically can claim the .doctor TLD. My question is, how will Handshake TLD work if it clashes? Like what happens when ICANN adds more TLD in the future? So for example, if someone owns doctor.com or really owns .doctor, like how will it work then when they also have a .doctor on the Handshake TLD?
Of course. Yeah. So this question has actually come up many times in the community. And I really want to say hats off to Tai Shun, the CEO of Namebase there, who's probably I've seen answer this question the most. But essentially, the way it works is, they go through this bureaucratic process when they want to add these names. They go to compile all the, attempted registrations for folks that are attempting to, join the process or get a new type of TLD added. This happens every, I think there's 4 years, something like that. And I think there's still another maybe 3 or 4 years going forward into the future, which has been announced publicly when they're going to get back to that process next to make their decision on whatever new names are going to be added to their state. So Handshake has a unique launch strategy where only certain names in the namespace are released over a 52-week period. So essentially, you take a name, say Bobby Ung, and you hash that, a SHA-3 hash, and then you modulus 52, And then that's how you get what week or how many weeks you need to wait after Handshake launches before your name becomes available. So what this means is, since you can have any name, so whether it's Chinese, whether it's in English, whether it's in Spanish, whether it's in Russian, no matter the translation, you can register that name on the blockchain. We will recognize that character as your unique TLD, but that name is only released within this 52-week period. So every week, a new set of names become available on the network for people to open up bids and start trying to purchase that name. And so there's a rolling period here initially. The first year of Handshake is very important because that's when all these names are slowly becoming available, while simultaneously folks are claiming their names from the airdrop. New services are coming online, adding new ways to resolve Handshake, different security models, different security trade-offs. And so us growing as a community and also as not only as like in usage, but also speculation of the asset, development of the code base, additional alternative clients. It's really just like build. And again, we're always going to attempt to be as compatible as possible. So if we get that far into the future and the community wanted to, for instance, like soft fork or hard fork in, additional changes that would, blacklist or make any additional things that would potentially add further backwards compatibility with additional DNS, governance of, chains allows those types of things to happen if the community believes that that's important. But the idea here is that Handshake should grow, in strength quickly, given organically, how things were built with the chain and, incentives. And if all things go according to plan, there'll be proof of work, economy of scales, people building ASICs, and there'll be large mining pools already supporting Handshake as is currently. That will, only continue to grow. So the incentive to secure and grow HNS as an asset, as a namespace, or whatever it is people, see Handshake as being useful for and using its asset and its covenant system, it will eventually give us what we need to be an alternative. So there is no right answer to the question of what are you going to do in the future of potential collisions. It all depends on how successful the community is and also what sort of flexibility governance-wise will the community allot the asset in order to make changes to ensure that doesn't have any problems going forward.
So if I'm interested in visiting a site that uses a Handshake domain, I believe that I will need to run a Handshake resolver. That sounds like a very troublesome thing to do. So is there any plans for Handshake to browsers like Brave, Opera to incorporate the resolver directly?
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about previously, where you don't have to run a full node in order to resolve Handshake names. As I was saying, there's different security models. So you can run a full node. You can authenticate names in the tree using a light client, which targets another full node, just provides you the name information that you need, but without having to download blockchain data. Or you can use another resolver, as I mentioned, like NextDNS, which will allow you to resolve your name using their VPN-like service. So think like Cloudflare's like 1.1.1.1 resolver. This one built by NextDNS by default has support for Handshake names. So when you go in your browser and type in, say, NB/, which is the name that Namebase bought from the Handshake chain, shorthand NB for Namebase, that will take you, directly to whatever site and records that Namebase has posted on there. So NextDNS, for instance, is as easy as going to nextdns.io, copying the authentication key that pops up on the website because it stores it as a cookie in your current session. It generates you a free authentication ID that you go into your settings, click enable Handshake resolve, and then you open up your phone and you go into the iOS store and Android app store, download their app. You click one button and then you paste in your authentication ID and you're done. And essentially it connects you to a personal VPN service that will then resolve your names through their service NextDNS. But then with that, it is backwards compatible in your browser for Handshake names. All you need to do is include the slash, for instance, like NB/ right in your browser, and it'll resolve it. And so with that, you can also, there's going to be support for other like root zones that currently already use Handshake and run Handshake resolvers. So you'll be able to just in a clear web browser, for instance, you can go to like a name-based site by going to nb.hs.run or nb.hs.zone. And with that, that's another zone that's being controlled that also hits a Handshake name, similar to like NextDNS, and will resolve your name. So the idea is that you won't have to do anything at all in order to support Handshake. So all you're doing is choosing, what level of security and what sort of trade-offs you want to give. Just like when you make the decision, do I want to use a Coinbase account and store my assets in a centralized bank service where Coinbase controls my keys? Or in this case, you could resolve your names through another service that, you're sending your encrypted traffic through, but still you're sending your traffic through it. But then also you can have a decision of, I want a non-custodial wallet. I'm going to generate my own keys. I'm going to have this locally. I'm going to have this backed up. I'm going to keep this stored in cold storage, which is the equivalent of, I'm going to run my own full node. I'm going to process all my requests. Or you have another friend that runs a full node, or you have another trusted service that runs a full node, and you just want to connect your light client to it. And then your light client then hits someone else's full node. So then you're still getting your records directly from the chain, where you're giving your trading off your security of running and verifying your own full node to another service. So the idea is that you want to be as flexible as possible. And that is what Handshake allows. And so as we can see, since Handshake's only launched February 3rd now, and we're maybe like 70 days just in since the launch, it will only continue to mature. And other services like Brave, for instance, they were just on a recent developer call this past Thursday, and they claimed their 3.3, almost 3.4 million HNS, I think it was, from the tree, which is a sizable amount at current prices, somewhere like $500,000. So a huge incentive for a company like Brave to just claim their name and then say, hey, we want to support Handshake in our browser. What ways can we do that? Can we use the light client? Do we use Dane, which is another authentication service, which is not as popular, but it adds for more forward compatibility, backward compatibility with Handshake as it stands currently? Or, do we want to add support for full nodes or whatnot, or what does that look like? And so, they already have people on the job. And so that came from the idea of that initial airdrop that we were talking about for name claim. So if you're in that Alexa top 100K, for instance, like Brave is, some of these other companies got larger allotments, i.e. Like Cloudflare, Nick Sullivan, who's the head of crypto there. We had a meeting with him to talk about Handshake. They're very excited about Handshake there too. So they'll probably do their name claim at some point in the near future. They're dealing with, I'm sure, the bureaucracy of, getting free internet money. So, that's a slower process as a large enterprise. Brave is a startup, so they can move a lot more quickly, right? But yeah, so, there are a lot of incentives for folks to make Handshake the easiest use as possible. And the developer community, continues to work on ways to make it not only easier to find names to purchase, but also to like spin up your own name servers so you can set your records for resolving your names, but also other faster ways for developers to be able to quickly build and deploy and to like test out without running full nodes and etc. And then almost 2 months is out, Handshake has grown pretty quickly. So I say give it another 2 or 3 months, we'll probably see a handful of different ways that you can quickly get up and running with Handshake. And there probably already are many I'm not even realizing off the top of my head.
Sounds very interesting. I can't wait for that time to come and I can easily resolve and open up a Handshake domain.
So right now, if you go to dns.live and you go to resources there, or learn more, I believe is what you click, it will show you, and you click resolvers. There's so many different ways that you can quickly get set up to resolve Handshake names, and most of them in just a couple of minutes.
So there was a Handshake domain name auction that's happening on Namebase recently. Not so sure if you know, but do you know any interesting stats, or like, for example, how many have been sold? What's the average price like? Any interesting names have been sold from the domain name auctions?
Yeah, for sure, dude. So there's 2 different ways you can get these metrics, right? You could, myself as an investor in Namebase as well, I don't know all these internal metrics, KPIs, as you don't necessarily have to be that public, but you can see all this stuff apparently from the chain itself. And so some of the sites that I've listed, DNS.live is one way to look at names and what names have been claimed, but there's 2 other resources that are really, really awesome if you're digging into Handshake at a high level very quickly. One is hsd.tools. So that's a website to allow you to see in many different languages when certain names are going to be available. So they just kind of run that little function that I mentioned earlier, SHA-3 hash of a name modulus 52, feed that into the system and tells you when that name will be available. But it will also show you the top bids for names historically, who's had the largest like bid mask in order to obfuscate their bid. What is the person that had the largest bid mask, but ultimately ended up paying like the smallest amount of money? Basically, like metrics behind auctions and like how they ended up and closing out since Handshake's launch, which is really cool to look at. And then if you want to get a high level view quickly of the activity on the chain, you can go to hnscan.com. So hnscan.com, kind of like Etherscan, kind of like ICANN. But you can go here and it shows you on the very front page, it shows network summary. And so far, there's been over 19,891 names just in the past 2 months that have been bid on and are currently in the process of closing to belong to someone. So a lot of activity there, but also currently daily transactions float somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 transactions to historically all-time high of over 20,500 daily transactions. So the chain gets a lot of activity. It handles this throughput very well. With some of the most expensive names historically. Let's see. If we go to hsd.tools, we can go to the leaderboard. The most expensive domain name, which is the very final price that was paid for the domain name, which is, since it's a second price auction, the winner is the highest bidder, but they only pay the second highest price that was bid in the auction. So at the end of the bidding process period, the highest bids so far have been for the crypto domain, which I believe might have been purchased by the Unstoppable Domain folks. They actually popped into the chat one day on Telegram and they were like, hey, like we want the .crypto domain name. And someone said, oh yeah, like, well, we can't stop the blockchain. So, you're just going to have to buy it. So I think they might've been this person, but they spent 200,000 HNS just for that. The other top name is 8 slash. So very popular number in China. So that was 180,000 HNS. Coin, that was 103,000 HNS. The number 7 slash 100,000 HNS. Zen 80,000. Namebase MB that I mentioned earlier, they spent 50,000 HNS in that name alone. 25,000 HNS for mining, 40,000 HNS for DEX. So there's been some pretty large bids that have been put out. So again, these are TLDs, right? So the person owns the right to control this name forever. So if I own the crypto name and I'm Unstoppable Domain folks, for instance, who I speculate may have bought this name, then now they also control this name on the HNS namespace as well, which is really cool. And then like if I own the name coin and I want to resell subdomain access to say like Bobby.coin or Mackie.coin, I can purchase, that right to like have that subdomain access just as like the same way I go to buy a .com name from another registrar. So effectively I am the registrar of coin or crypto. And so, there's also future speculative value on what can I resell that name for, but also what can I reutilize this name for? Is this a brand now? Would someone else want to buy access to, I bought like crypto funds or something like that. And I'm a Momentum. Do I want to buy a Momentum.crypto fund? Just have that resolved to my actual website. There's a lot of cool complexity here that happens with Handshake because you have this fungible asset, HNS, but then you burn this fungible asset into the covenant state in order to create a non-fungible name that then could be transferred, resold, etc., to other people and other addresses. And there's some really interesting dynamics there happening economically too, because as names become more popular on the system, there's further deflation happening as assets are being burned into the covenant state once they've gone through the bid process, the reveal process, and effectively once they register their name, that HNS in their original bid is burned and is no longer spendable from that address. So, we have an emission of 288,000 HNS a day. So there's 144 blocks a day with a 10-minute block time, just like normal Bitcoin. And so the difficulty adjustment algorithm is dynamic and adjusts and tries to always effectively have 144 blocks a day. So there's a fixed emission from henceforth. And there's happenings every 3.5 years. Scarcity of the asset will continue going forward as the deflationary aspect of the asset continue to grow, and the adoption of the namespace continues, and the economies of scale are built on top of not only names and services, but also individuals mining the asset. So it's the birth and growth of a burgeoning community that is, if successful, will generate a lot of wealth in many different ways.
It's very interesting. Thanks a lot for showing out all these stats. I find it really interesting looking at some of the most expensive domains, some of the highest bids and all. It's .crypto and all. It's pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, so I think I've asked all the questions that I wanted to ask today. So it's been great having you on the show today, Stephen. Thank you very much for taking the time to explain everything about Handshake to us.
Yeah, of course. And if anyone wants to have any discussions, if they're just curious about Handshake and want to learn more, there's a couple of social channels for that. There's the @HNS Twitter handle on Twitter, which is run by the HSD developers. And then there's also @HNS Miner, which is run by us at Handy Miner, which build the Handy Miner mining client. And we have a community on Telegram as well, t.me/handshake talk. And then there's also another channel for developers who want to just talk specifically development, and that's t.me/HNS_tech. So as you can tell, it takes a lot to explain Handshake and what it is and kind of the thought process behind it, because it is such a complex thing. So if anyone ever has any questions or wants to know where there are resources to learn more about what it is I've said, or wants to critique anything I said, feel free to reach out on those communities.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will add these all to the show notes later on. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot again for explaining Handshake to all of us.
No problem. Thanks, Bobby.
All right, that wraps up the show. Thank you for listening to the CoinGecko podcast with Bobby. If you like our show and want to know more, check out podcast.coingecko.com, or please leave us a review on iTunes. If you have any feedback, do drop us an email at hello@coingecko.com. Join us for more next week. See ya!
This podcast is provided as part of the overall information on cryptocurrency contained on our website, is for your general information only, and does not howsoever constitute any endorsement, financial or investment advice, nor any solicitation or offer of securities or other financial instruments. CoinGecko and the podcast presenter makes no warranties, implied or express, of any kind in relation to this podcast, including, without limitation, the accuracy and updatedness of its content. All opinions and recommendations there in the podcast are based on the personal opinion of the presenter. Please conduct your own research and procure professional advice should you, at your own risk, decide to howsoever invest or trade in relation to the content contained in the podcast.